this august university. Congressman Lewis, just about an hour ago, received the University of Virginia's highest award that's provided to folks outside, the 2015 Thomas Jefferson Foundation Medal in Citizen Leadership. There are 3 of these medals that the university provides each year, one in architecture, one in law, and one in civic leadership. Each of these areas represents the 3 areas that President Jefferson made great contributions in. I'm not going to read and go through the whole set of preparatory remarks, but I'd like to sort of hit some of the highlights. Now, Jefferson, near the end of his life, he's very kind of a control guy. He designed his own monument. He didn't leave that to others. And he dictated very specifically what he wanted to be on his monument. And he said there were 3 things that he wanted to be known for. He wanted to be known as the author of the Declaration of American Independence. He wanted to be known as the author of the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom. It became a foundation of American religious freedom. And he wanted to be known as the father of the University of Virginia. Now, any one of those 3 things, accomplishments, would be extraordinary. All 3 of those things that he wanted to be known for, any one of those 3 individual things, transformed the lives of people, not just here in Charlottesville or here in the state of Virginia, but also in the country and world as a whole. Now, this is not to say that Thomas Jefferson didn't have his faults. He had many. He fell prey to many weaknesses that people like Shakespeare, Cicero, and others have been writing about for millennia. At the same time, however, Jefferson did make extraordinary contributions, as has our guest with us today. Congressman Lewis is going to be remembered, I think, for 3 broad areas. To this point, he has a lot left in him to go, so we don't know yet what his greatest contributions will be. The first will be, though, his contributions as a member of the original Big Six of the American Civil Rights Movement. People do and will marvel at the fact Congressman Lewis was 21 years old when he became one of the original Freedom Riders. Students in the audience today, place yourself. Think about the personal risks that the congressman took. 3 years later, he became chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He helped to organize and presented a keynote speech at the historic March on Washington in August of 1963. 2 years later, along with a couple of other fellow activists and volunteers, they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, where they were met with extraordinary violence and the confrontation that's become known as Bloody Sunday. All of these things took place before the congressman was 25 years old. Now, those contributions alone would be enough, just as any one of the things that Jefferson did would be enough. But that's not all there is. Second, the congressman has been a long and faithful public servant to both his district and to the nation as a whole. In 1981, he was elected to the Atlanta City Council, and 5 years later, he was elected representative of Georgia's 5th Congressional District. He's served both ever since. The third and perhaps most lasting legacy of the congressman has been his support and actions as an unshakable champion of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I was talking with one of your classmates as we were walking over, and we were talking about the notion that Thomas Jefferson was a revolutionary, but almost immediately thereafter became a counter-revolutionary. And that if we look at periods of great change in American history, it tends to be fairly episodic. We can think of the Revolution of 1776. We can think of the American Civil War. But then there's a 100-year gap where the dreams of the American Civil War, it takes 100 years for those to be pushed through into legal action that affect everyone's lives today in 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. In the decades since 1965, Congressman Lewis has remained vigilant against threats to Americans of all backgrounds' ability to exercise their personal franchise. Congressman John Lewis's body of work, these 3 things and the many other accomplishments of his life, provide a dramatic example to all of you young people here today of what citizen leadership is at its finest. Congressman Lewis.
Thank you very much, Dean, for those kind words of introduction. I must tell each and every one of you that I'm delighted, very happy, and very pleased to be here. I didn't grow up in a big city like Norfolk or Richmond, Newport News, Charlottesville, Alexander. I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But back in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4. How many of you remember when you were 4? What happened to the rest of us? My father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. My family still own that land today. On this farm, we raised a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. It was my responsibility to care for the chickens. And I know here at this great university, here in this great state, some of you know something about eating chicken, right? But you don't know anything about raising chicken. But let me tell you what I had to do as a young boy growing up in rural Alabama during the 40s and the 50s. When the setting hen was set, to take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. Some of you may be saying, now, John Lewis, why do you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you place them under the setting hen? Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest, and there would be some more eggs. Had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. You follow me? It's okay, you don't follow me, it's all right. So from time to time, when these little chicks were hatched, I would take these little chicks and put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own. I'd give them to another hen, get some more fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, encourage the setting hen to stay on the nest for another 3 weeks. I kept on fooling and cheating on these setting hens. When I look back on it, it was not the right thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most nonviolent thing to do. It was not the most democratic thing to do. But I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive incubator or hatcher from the Silver Buck store. Any of you young people, young student, old enough, maybe some of your teachers, the teachers are young too, but maybe some of your great-grandparents or your grandparents will remember the Silver Buck catalog. Remember? Dean, you're not that old. No. And that big book, heavy book, some people call it the wish book. I wish I had this, I wish I had that. Well, I just kept on wishing. But as a little boy, about 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to preach the gospel. So from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and my cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard, like you would gather here in this hall. And my brothers and sisters and cousins would line the outside of the chicken yard. But along with the chickens, they would help make up the audience, the congregation. And I would start speaking or preaching. And when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But some of those chickens that I preached to in the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listened to me today in the Congress. And as a matter of fact, some of those chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. That's enough for that story. But it's a true story, I tell you. When we would visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? That's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. I didn't like segregation. I didn't like racial discrimination. And I wanted to do something about it. In 1955, 15 years old, in the 10th grade, I heard the Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to find a way to get in the way. I got in the way. I got in trouble. What I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Leaders should be prepared to get in trouble. To get out there and push and pull, mold and shape opinion, to make things better. So inspired by Dr. King, so inspired by Rosa Parks, that in 1956, 16 years old, with some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we went down to the public library trying to check out some books, trying to get library cards. And we were told by the librarian that the library was not for coloreds, for whites only. I never went back to the Pike County Public Library in the little town of Troy, Alabama, until July 5th, 1998. By this time I'm in the Congress for a book signing of my first book, Walking with the Wind. After the book signing was over, they gave me a library card. So I said to you, leaders must never give up. Leaders must be bold, be courageous, and lead. Be a headlight and not a tail light. I'll give you one more story, then I'm going to finish and let you ask me some questions. In 1957, 17 years old, when I finished high school in May of 1957, I wanted to attend a little college 10 miles from my home called Troy State College, now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the college. I didn't tell my mother, didn't tell my father, any of my teachers. I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., told him I needed his help. He wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I had been accepted at a little college in Nashville, Tennessee. And after being in Nashville for about 3 weeks, I told one of my teachers that I've been in contact with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This teacher knew Dr. King. They both had studied together at Morehouse College in Atlanta. He informed Dr. King that I was there. Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch with me and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, I boarded a Greyhound bus, traveled to Montgomery, and a young African-American lawyer by the name of Fred Gray met me at the Greyhound bus station in downtown Montgomery. Fred Gray had been the lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King, and became our lawyer during the Freedom Ride and during the march from Selma to Montgomery. Drove me to the First Baptist Church, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a colleague of Dr. King, and ushered me into the office of the church. And I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared, I didn't know what to say or what to do. And Dr. King spoke up and said, "Well, you the boy from Troy? Well, you John Lewis?" I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. And he started calling me the boy from Troy. From that day on, I never looked back. I continued to study in Nashville, studying the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence, and grew to accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. And I got very much involved in the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride. Got arrested a few times along the way. But why don't we just open up for questions? I'm going on too long. Okay?
And public policy student at the University of Virginia. Prior to coming back to UVA, I was a press secretary in the Senate. One of the most formative things for me was really understanding the stories of my grandmother, who taught in segregated South Carolina for 44 years. and also hearing from my dad. One story he told me about was when he went to register to vote. And he walked in, and the lady at the register said that he had to count all of the jelly beans in a big jar. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they called the police. The police came, and they said, do you know who these children are? Do you know the prominence of their name? And so they eventually allowed them to vote. But what my dad taught me was the importance of making sure that people have that equal opportunity to succeed when they don't have the prominence of that name. And so can you give us a leadership lesson in the sense of when you're faced with those situations where you can say, no, I'm not going to do that, and it's the right thing, how you push through and how you look at the bigger picture and keep that in mind? Thank you.
If you're ever on Capitol Hill, you come to Capitol Hill here, come by and visit my office in the Cannon Building. This young man over here, who's a graduate of this great university, will tell you that we have a very large, would you call it a jar? Jar, right? That's the proper name for it, right? It's a very large jar, and we keep it with jelly beans. I was speaking several years ago in the state of Louisiana, and someone gave me the jar full of jelly beans because they heard me tell the story. And for a few days, I was out of Washington, went on a trip someplace. This happened a few years ago. And I came back, all of the jelly beans was taken out. We put it up so high because we have a lot of young people, a lot of students coming, and we don't want them to eat those jelly beans that have been there so long. They're old. So they took all the old jelly beans out and washed the jar and put it up. Fresh batch. I guess it's about time for us to change the jar again. I have to make some decisions. I've made some. Some tough ones, some hard ones. As a participant in the movement, as I never call myself a leader, but I know I had to lead. I had to play that role from time to time. When people would be sitting in, and I would maybe just walk down the aisle and say, be quiet. Don't talk back. Sit up straight. Smile. Look straight ahead. You know, little things, simple things. I'll give you one example. We heard that we were going to get arrested if we went down on a particular day in February 1960 to participate in the movement. To sit in. Because you'd be sitting there and someone would come up and spit on you or put a lighted cigarette out in your hair or down your back. I wanted to look pretty clean, know what I mean, if I were going to be arrested on this particular day. So I went downtown Nashville. I had very little money, and I wanted a new suit. I have enough money to buy a new suit. If I were going to go to jail and be arrested, I wanted to look pretty clean. So I went to a used men's store and bought a suit. I paid $5 for it. And a few months ago now, one of the staff people were able to get a very large photograph of that suit from my first arrest. And I did look good in it. And, you know, if I had it today, I probably can sell it on eBay, but I wouldn't do that. I don't know, forget my point.
I'm Debra McDowell, and I teach here in the English department and direct the Carter Woodson Institute. I first want to say to the audience who wouldn't know this about your tremendous generosity in being Skyped into my class which was a great experience for my students. And then 2 weeks ago, students from another class accompanied Julian Bond on the Civil Rights South tour. And they list to a person, the highlight of the visit was the interaction with you. So I'm going to ask you a question on behalf of the class because I couldn't answer the question. In the interview that you gave our students, you spoke almost verbatim about Bloody Sunday. We had read that segment from your autobiography, and the students marveled that there you were delivering extemporaneously, almost verbatim, this chapter of your book. So they said, how did he remember that? I said, I have no idea. Little did I know I'd have this opportunity to ask you that question. But on behalf of my students, I'm asking you this question about the powers of memory, because they and I marvel at your ability to basically give us a verbal transcript of Bloody Sunday in your interviews with them 3 weeks ago on the Civil Rights South tour. Thank you so much for all of your work.
Well, I will make it brief so we can maybe get more questions, and I won't talk so much myself. That's not any way for me to forget what happened and how it happened on March 7, 1965. We thought we would be arrested and we would be taken to jail as we tried to walk across the bridge on our way from Selma to Montgomery. As I said to some of you maybe earlier today, I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. And in this backpack, since I thought we were going to go to jail, I wanted to have something to read while I was in jail. I had 2 books, had 1 apple and 1 orange, something to eat. I had toothpaste and toothbrush. I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. We got to the highest point crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So all of this water down below, the young man walking beside me by the name of Jose Williams from Dr. King's organization said, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No, what about you?" He said, "Yes, a little." So, well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump. We're going straight ahead. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. All white men, no women. They went hiring women to be state troopers, not any minorities. We continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. A man spoke up and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march. Will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your homes or to your church." And Jose Williams said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." The major said, "Troopers, advance." You saw these men putting on their gas masks. And I said, "Major, may I have a word?" He said, "No word." They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. My legs went from under me. I fell to the ground. Thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. 50 years later, I don't know how I made it back across that bridge to the little church that we had left from. Apparently someone just carried me, but I do remember being back in the church. And someone asked me to say something. So I came to the audience, in front of the audience, and I said something like, "I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama, to protect people who only desires to register to vote." The next thing I knew, I'd been taken to the Good Samaritan Hospital in downtown Selma, the same place where Jimmy Lee Jackson had died. It was the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, the shooting of him in Marian, Alabama. He was brought to Selma to the Good Samaritan Hospital where he died. 17 of us were hospitalized that day on March 7th. Then on Monday, March 8th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to the hospital to visit us and told us not to worry, that he made an appeal for religious leaders to come to Selma More than 1,000 ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns came. The majority of that march on March 9th were white citizens from all over America, religious leaders.
Good afternoon, Congressman.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes. My name is Trudy Obi. I'm a fourth-year foreign affairs major, also a member of the Zeta chapter, Phi Beta Sigma here at the university.
So how you doing, brother?
Doing fine, sir? Yeah. So I know recently, 50 years now, the Voting Rights Act has been in place, but at the same time, last year we saw the unfortunate, gutting of it, the removal of principal parts of it. And even though we've made a lot of progress 50 years later, there's still social challenges that need to be faced, especially with what's been happening of recent events concerning racial tensions in the United States. So my question to you is, or questions, is that what are you doing to try to, I guess, restore the Voting Rights Act back to its original stage, and how would you encourage, I guess, other people or other young men of color to, continue to fight against any type of prejudice?
Well, it's a very good question, and thank you for asking. I've said in the past that the vote is powerful. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool or instrument we have in a democratic society, and we have to use it. I was sitting in the audience when the Supreme Court considered the debate over the future of the Voting Rights Act. And when the decision came down, I wanted to cry, but I couldn't cry. Too many friends of mine gave a little blood for the Voting Rights Act. I gave a little blood on that bridge. But three young men that I knew, Andy Goodman, Mickey Sherner, white, James Chaney, African American, on the night of June 21st, 1964, gave their very lives in Mississippi for the right of all of our citizens to vote. On the House side, we have introduced legislation to fix what the Supreme Court, as you stated, put a dagger, paraphrasing your words, but that's what they did. They put a dagger in the very heart of the Voting Rights Act. If we can bring it out of committee, we could pass it. Almost every Democratic member of the House will vote for it, and we'll pick up enough Republican to pass it through the House. The Senate leadership would like to see the House go first. We did it a few years ago when we reauthorized the Act. President George W. Bush supported it. We passed it. I think on the Senate side, not a single negative vote. On the House side, there was only 33 votes against it. Bobby Scott from this state has been working very hard. Republican member, Congressman Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin, he felt it was an affront to him because he felt the Voting Rights Act was one of his babies. I think we will fix it. We will do it. We must do it. Hopefully we can do it before the election in 2016.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlie Ryan. I'm a Master of Public Policy student here at UVA. And this past summer, I was fortunate enough to intern with the Children's Defense Fund. And I know that you spoke at the Freedom School's national training last summer. So my question for you was, what do you think are the most important improvements that can be made within our schools and our universities as we look to improve race relations and civil rights going forward?
Well, I think it's important. I really enjoyed being there. It was like a modern day happening. It took me back to the early 60s. There was an unbelievable spirit there. And thank you for being there. Thank you for your work. Marian Wright is one of these unbelievable human beings. Smart, gifted, and all of the people that you surround yourself with. They're just good people. You're good to be there. Thank you. First of all, we must see that all of our children, all of our young people receive the best possible education. I think we should teach in our school system, whether public school, private, teach them the civil rights movement. Let people know what another generation did. Teach them the music. You know, music is very powerful. It gives you that sense of hope, that sense of optimism, creating that sense of solidarity, that we're all in this thing together. I know we need smaller classrooms, but we need to spend hundreds, thousands, millions, and billions of dollars to educate. More money on school buildings, on libraries, and less on prisons, less on war. That's what we got to do it. We must do it. I travel sometime to Europe, to Germany and Scandinavian countries, and I hate to say this, but I just get the feeling that young people in Europe are much more informed about the American Civil Rights Movement than young people in our own country. They even know the names of people. They ask you about it. They ask you about Diane Nash. Where's Diane Nash? What is she doing? So we got to spend time educating and informing people.
Well, Congressman Lewis, again, thank you. Congratulations on all your awards. And of course, you know, we met Civil Rights Tour of the South with Julian Bond, and last year, Links Festival of the Book. But this is a question as an African-American male, and I think if I recall, you were influenced by your grandfather, perhaps? But this question is, growing up, what would you say was the greatest influence or influences on your life to make you the man that you are today? And kind of put this in context of us raising sons, and in my case, grandsons, today, and what kind of takeaways they should have within the family, household, and the community.
Well, to be brief, several things. I grew up very poor, 6 brothers and 3 sisters, on this farm. We had to work in the field, and to be very frank and candid with you, I didn't like working in the field. I didn't like being out in the hot sun. And sometimes I would fall behind on picking cotton or gathering peanuts. And my mother would say, "Boy, you're falling behind." And I would say something like, "This is hard work." And my mother would say, "Hard work never killed anybody." I said, "Well, it's about to kill me." Right. But as a young child, I would get up early some morning and get my book bag and put my books in the book bag and hide under the porch, the front porch, and wait for the school bus to come along. Then I'd slip out and get on the school bus and go off to school. I had an uncle, one of my mother's younger brothers, who instilled in me that education was important, and had a wonderful teacher in elementary school who said, "Read, my child, read." And I tried to read everything. We were too poor to have a subscription to the local paper, the Montgomery Advertiser. But Dr. King Pitcher and others outstanding African-American pitchers with a P in the paper. Most of you are too young to know anything about this. During February, when you had, we used to call it Negro History Week, and although you're a little older, African-American History Month now, we had to make a scrapbook, and so I would clip out the famous and outstanding African-American art, put it in these books. So that taught me something. My first field trip was to travel to Tuskegee when I was in the 4th grade. So seeing those images helped to make me the person that I am. Seeing Jackie Roberts and Ralph Bunch and other people sort of drove me. And meeting Martin Luther King Jr., meeting Rosa Parks when I was 17, to listen to Dr. King, it was like saying, you too can do something, John Lewis. You too can make a contribution. So I was inspired. And I didn't like working on the farm.
Good afternoon. You spoke obviously and commented on a lot of various setbacks and discouragements to your participation in the civil rights movement. What would you say is the largest or what was the biggest discouragement and the closest to making you ever second guess participating in that movement? And how did you come back from that discouragement and recognize your importance and the continued participation?
Well, let me just say, I never ever thought about sort of dropping out, of giving up or giving in, and said, this is enough. You've been arrested too many times. You've been beaten in jail and left bloody. Greyhound bus station in Montgomery, being in Rock Hill, South Carolina, being in Selma. I never, ever thought about just saying, this is it. Because there's I always felt there's still more work to do. So you hang in there, you keep the faith, you keep pushing, you keep pulling. And I spent a lot of time in Washington and in Atlanta talking with children. I was very, very young. Will over here would tell you, probably more than anyone else in the office, that we see hundreds and hundreds of children from all across the nation that come, the KIPP students, not just elementary or middle school or high school, but college students, graduate students come from one major university over and over again. Not the same group, like all fifth graders for the same group from the KIPP schools. Because I feel like I have an obligation, a mission, and a mandate to pass it on. And maybe somehow, in some way, another group will emerge and be another group of leaders to get out there and make our country and make our world a better place for everybody. One thing that distressed me a great deal, and it was the cost of my life's arrest. Was it last October or 2 Octobers ago? We had a comprehensive immigration bill that passed the Senate, and the Speaker wouldn't bring it to the floor of the House. And if he had brought it to the floor of the House, we would have passed the bill. President Obama would have signed it into law. It doesn't make sense in our country, in a democratic society such as ours, to have millions and millions of people living in the shadow. Bring them out to the light and set them on the path to citizenship. We all are immigrants. We all are immigrants. The late A. Philip Randolph was said from time to time, maybe our forefathers and our foremothers all came to this great land in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. So we got to look out for each other and care for each other. And it doesn't matter whether we're black or white, Latino or Asian American or Native American. We're one people, we're one family, we're one house. We all live in the same house. That's how we're going to make it in America. And maybe we can emerge as a model for the rest of the world if we get it right.
Thank you very much.